You've become very involved in issues to do with helping others to teach history. What are the sort of major developments that you perceive over the time that you've been involved in those things?
In the years that I've been teaching, the whole social world of teaching has changed radically.
Really?
When I began, teaching was something you did on your own, you didn't talk about. If you had a problem, you kept it to yourself. If you had a success, the students knew it. And the assumption was that you were a good teacher or you were a bad teacher, and you were born with that. And there wasn't much to do about it. That's changed radically. Very few people in my university, I think now, still subscribe to that vision. There's a notion that there are things that you can do to make yourself a better teacher. And because of that, there's communities now of practice in which things are shared. And that's made the job so much more pleasant. When you succeed at something, there's somebody besides the students. The students are great, but they're involved in the process. Their job is not to evaluate in a certain sense what technique you're using or whether this is working or not. But your colleagues can do that. And visiting other people's classes, having them visit my classes has been a wonderful experience, sharing that sort of experience. I remember one colleague came in, a good friend, sitting in the back of a large class, and he had never used collaborative learning. And so at a certain point, I said to the students, now I want you to do this, and gave them a task. And he said, I was sitting way in the back, where I was sure the students weren't going to do anything, and they did it. They did exactly what you asked them to do, and I was amazed. And of course, that's a great moment. But I've had the same moment in other people's classes. In fact, that's why I went into collaborative learning, because I visited a sociologist class, and in 5 minutes I saw, oh, I had read about it, but now I saw it, saw how it operated, and I've never looked back since then. So being part of a teaching community is a terribly important thing for me now. And it's now an international community.
You've led me really well into the next question, actually, which is, what constructive advice might you give yourself now if you were starting again or if you were right at the beginning of your career as a teacher?
What advice would I give myself if I were back at the beginning? There's just so much. I arrived at the university with no teaching experience, essentially, never having read anything about teaching, having zero knowledge about how to do it. So anything I told myself would be useful. That was what we used to take for granted. We're beginning to see, at least in the United States, and I think here too, some training of students who are preparing to be professors, some training in teaching. It needs to be expanded greatly. We need to start out with some knowledge. There's no reason why we should have to reinvent all these methods. So, but what would I tell myself specifically? I tell myself about group work, about collaborative learning, that I didn't have to do it all. I would tell myself to get information about the students repeatedly, have them write down, what did you hear in the last 30 minutes? What's the most important idea? Things like that. Something I've developed, which I think works real well, it's terribly simple, but ask people to turn to the person next to them and explain what you've just done. And see if it works. And then go around, listen, and get some feedback, constant feedback from the class about what's happening and what's clear. Also, I've now switched to assignments online before class. And so I meet twice a week. So the day before the first class, they have to turn something in. If my life is arranged appropriately, I can read those assignments before class. It doesn't always happen, but that's terribly useful to have the information before you go into the class about what's being understood and what's not being understood. This just-in-time teaching approach developed by Gregor Novak has been terribly useful to me. Plus, it structures the students' work. Students are given a reading assignment, often don't know what to stress. And in history, you don't learn everything. You don't memorize everything, or there's a serious problem. The exercises focus their work, give them some preparation. I was actually surprised when I started doing these. I thought the students would complain about the extra work because I added these assignments on top of everything else. I've gotten almost no complaints, and I've gotten a number of students say, this helped.
Great.
On my course evaluations last time in a small class, I was using this kind of approach with online pre-class exercises. Of 16 students who took the evaluation, 15 picked the exercises as being extremely helpful to me, and the other one said helpful.
Great.
And he wrote on the back of his form, I think this was good for the other students, but I don't need this. So I've been surprised that they like that kind of structure, at least my students do. Something I give advice to any teacher, though, is pay attention to your students. There are all these ideas out there, but you have a particular student, you have a particular personality, you have a way of interacting with students. I would say, try things at the edge of your range.
Right.
Don't reach out and do something that's completely out of character, because you're probably going to fail, intentionally if not unintentionally, because it doesn't feel right. But to constantly be trying to expand the range. The number of tools that you have is crucial. There's an old saying from the 50s, I think, at least in the United States, that the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. And if you go into the classroom with like one thing you can do, you have no ability to respond to what's really happening. If you have a lot of different tools, a lot of different things you can imagine happening in that period, then you're in a position to respond to what's actually happening and to those particular students.
It's interesting, isn't it, that often people at the beginning of their careers will be very focused on knowing the knowledge, the content stuff, and it will be that they worry an awful lot about, being a few steps ahead of the students. But what you seem to be saying there is having a kind of range of tools to use with the students to utilize that knowledge, not to kind of impose it.
Yes, the instructor will almost always know a great deal more about the subject than the students. That's just the bottom line. And if you're not playing the sage in the stage role, you don't have to know everything. They can be learning things on their own that you haven't learned yet, and that's okay. They can have thoughts you haven't thought, and that's good. So we're trying to nurture their thinking, not giving exhibitions of our thinking. You can do that in a publication, in your research, etc. That's fine. But the point is, what are they learning, not what are you showing? So, you have to know your subject. Going in with big holes in your knowledge can be a problem, but I don't think that's the cause for 99% of the problems that occur in classrooms. Advice I would give myself, my younger self, or someone who's starting out. In addition to other things, I would say self-reflexivity is so important. You have to pay attention to yourself, aware of what you're doing and who you are. This is an art form that requires the entire person, entire personality, which is one of the great advantages of it. It's a place where you can become more of a person than you were before. I think to really become a good teacher, you have to explore yourself in most cases. You have to learn what where's your inflexibility? Where can't you respond to the world? What blocks do you have? And slowly work on those. So it's a matter of personal development as well as other things. And that makes it very, very rewarding. But thinking about who you are and what you're doing is a part of the process. It's not just about the students. It's also about what you're doing with the students, how you're presenting yourself, and all of that. So that's the important part.
How best can people do that? Because that's quite challenging, isn't it? That kind of self-reflection.
It's a wonderful question. How can people best become aware of who they are? I guess this is a question for all of us all the time. Of course, reading about teaching and then and seeing other people teach can have you get a better sense of who you are. It's always the comparison to something else that makes it clear. But also just having a channel running in your brain about what you're doing. Now, you don't want to become obsessed with that. You have to allow yourself to make mistakes. It's really an important part of teaching, is to recognize that some days it doesn't work, and it's not necessarily your fault. The teaching assistants at our university have one great advantage in our department when they start teaching, that typically they're running small sections of maybe 3 or 4 a week on the same topic with the same plan. And what they see right at the beginning is it's not just them. It's the time of day, it's the room, it's the particular combination of students, etc. And I think that's a terribly valuable thing for any teacher to have. So you have to let yourself make mistakes. Watch what's happening, imagine how you might have done something different, but not being too critical. Too much self-criticism makes it very hard to see oneself. You begin hiding things from yourself. And so a kind of acceptance that you're not perfect, I think is a crucial part of the whole enterprise.
Do you think it's helpful to keep a journal or anything like that?
I have not kept a journal, and I wish I had.
Oh, okay.
I think it would be wonderful to read the early things. Maybe embarrassing, but it's part of that accepting oneself. Yes, I would think that would be a wonderful practice for anybody beginning teaching, or even someone who's been teaching for some time, to write down what happened. I know there are people that after every class write down notes, and that's a terribly valuable thing. I lack the discipline sometimes to do that, but I think that's one of the most valuable things you could do.
And you talked earlier also about communities of practice.
Yes.
How important do you think it is to become involved in it?
I think that it's crucial to become part of a community of practice. Otherwise, you're just operating so much on your own, and it helps, I think, with the self-awareness too, to recognize other people have different styles and thinking, well, why don't I do what they did? Maybe I should. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe there's a good reason for me not doing what they did. Something else which is terribly important is recognizing that you have a particular way of interfacing with the world. The world sees you in certain ways, and learning how to use that effectively. I've been teaching for almost 30 years now, a course for our postgraduate students to prepare them for the classroom. And for a long time, I followed what was at the time a common notion that you needed to break down authority, to give up some of the power in the classroom, and that's often a good idea. And then one of the women in the class called me on it, and she said, you're at that point middle-aged, male, tall, all these kind of things. You can do this. I'm a young female. I can't do it. And I realized she was absolutely right, that every person has a way of interfacing with the world, and the world gives you back things. And you have to play with that. I mean, some are maybe easier than others. I think every role has its advantages, has things you can do that someone else can't do. Yes. But learning how to work within your role, not necessarily picking up all the advice you get, because the advice that works very well for somebody who has a different way of being in the world, a different perception by the world, is not going to necessarily work for you. So trying things out, but also measuring them, being aware of who you are. I think there's some particular problems for women, often for minorities in the classroom, and probably generally for younger people as opposed to older people in the class, with establishing authority. And if that's a problem, you need to focus on it.
And are there ways of overcoming those problems?
Yes, there are. One thing is self-monitoring.
Right.
For someone like me, a kind of self-deprecating humor is useful. It breaks things down, it relaxes stuff. I think humor is good for almost everybody, but you have to be careful how you use it if you're in certain kinds of roles. Again, getting feedback from the students regularly is really, really valuable. Often women end up having things projected on them. Often students expect them to be nurturing, to take care of them in ways that they don't expect male professors to be. And all that's an important part of the teaching process. Now, I think one of the reasons for communities of practice is to begin to understand these better. To understand that certain comments are going to appear on the course evaluations of a woman or a person of color that are common to that category rather than that particular person.
So that's a really important thing in terms of what a community of practice can give you. It can kind of reassure you that others are maybe having the same sort of experience. It's not just you.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes, sharing your experience can be really, really liberating. And sharing it with people that are in the same category that you are, I think is very, very important. So yes, that's one of the real reasons to do it.
Well, thank you very much indeed, David Pays. It's been really great talking to you.
It's been a great pleasure, Jean.